Everybody, so much for tuning in to another episode of Extracting Wisdom. We are live from the Voices of Dentistry Podcast Summit 2020, and I am joined here by Mr. Tyler Tolbear, Clay Schwinky like a Twinkie, I am told, Dr. David Maloley,
Justin Moody, my main man,
Dr. Moody, Michelle Strange, Andrew Johnson from A Tale of Two Hygienists podcast, Dr. Moody, Landon Allen, Dustin Barr, Dr. Brian Gill, Dave Rohr, George Hariri, Matt Marino.
Got it.
Oh my gosh, there we go. I'm a master. One and done, baby. Peyton Keller, welcome to the show, man.
You are now listening to Extracting Wisdom. Here to help you prevent the decay of your future is your host, Brandon Everett.
Hello, everybody, and thanks for tuning in to another episode of Extracting Wisdom. My name is Brandon Everett, and we are live at Day 2, Voices of Dentistry 2020. And joining me on this podcast is Dr. David Maloley. David Maloley, welcome to the show. Thanks for being on.
Brandon, it's always fun to connect with like-minded people. I know I'm a little bit further along in my journey than you are, but it's always a learning and a connecting and a friendship experience. And
yeah,
that's probably one thing I didn't appreciate when I got into the game in 2013, but now some of my best friends in the world are a direct or indirect byproduct of this medium.
Yeah,
right?
I know.
Right?
I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
And my first big dental conference I went to was the Life and Dentistry Conference last year. And that's where I met you for the first time. And I met so many other, precocious dental students and so many other people there. But like, you realize that those are the people that you have so much in common with because they have so much drive and they think very similarly to the way that you do. And yeah, you just connect with those people and you become great friends.
It's funny when you walk into a room and like, say I go to a dental school and it's an evening thing or a Thursday evening thing, and sure, they can bait you in with pizza or whatever, but
right.
I also recognize that there's a majority of the students who aren't there, right? And so it's really defining. I don't know. I mean, a lot of us are achievers, and so we don't know another way, right? But those people who are on the fence of do I go or do I not go, I hope they understand that if you want a career trajectory or whatever you sat across from the admissions board and said that you wanted, if you really want that, it's those little kind of brick by brick experiences that unlock friendships and unlock opportunities, and you'll never know what missing that 1 hour, that one weekend really means. So it's really a general agreement that I'm willing to do what others aren't willing to do to get what they don't have. And so it's not this accumulation thing. I don't want it to sound like that, but I also want dentists to have really prosperous and promising careers because I know how that affects their team, their families, their patients. Yeah. And the ripple effect of that is powerful, as is the ripple effect of not having that momentum and sort of thing. But that's a defining decision day by day, week by week, having these conversations or not.
Right, and I totally agree with that, and I just wish more dental students would take that opportunity that there's all these great meetings out here, and I try to get as many dental students as I can to come to these, and it says a lot about the people that actually come to them and recognize. I know that obviously we're all students and sometimes financials get in the way, but the students that recognize the importance of these meetings and the connections and networking that all of these things provide.
And not all meetings are dressed alike, right?
Right,
like,
exactly.
So, like this is, everyone has their guard down. There's some cinnamon whiskey over in the corner.
Fireball, yeah.
There was some AC/DC cranking last night. Like, so this is a pretty dressed down meeting, and most of my career I wasn't attending those meetings. They were very clinical, introvert scientists, and so a meeting like this, even if you're that, and most dentists are, it pulls the social side out of you, whereas something that's very like bullet point, slide, clinical slide, what I saw in those meetings is let's take a 30-minute break, and everyone went in the hall and called their spouses, as opposed to shaking somebody's hand and saying like, hey, what are you up to? What are you challenged with? Where are you succeeding? So I think this is this is, I wouldn't say revolutionary, but I see more and more meetings like this because I'm ruined. I can't go to a big state meeting that's selling an agenda or a certain conversation. I need to go and be around people who are doing real stuff and who are vulnerable enough to say like, hey, there's some days that aren't rosy, because there's my first part of my career was this insecurity because my stuff never looked like that and my days never ran like that, and my financial margins and
Right.
clinical
Yeah,
margins weren't that perfect. And so to get around people who are willing to say, like, I win, but it's because of my losses, and understanding that those obstacles can be cleared is really important, because a lot of dentists have a bit of an identity crisis of I'm not enough, because we're chasing perfection, but there's never enough of more, right?
Right, yeah.
So now you're 40 years in and like, what the hell am I doing? Like, there's a completely different path that's available, but it's not obvious, I think.
Right. And
Yeah.
again, too, like that, it's just really cool to come to these places and talk about all of that. Like, it's not all bright and flashy and shiny. You know,
Right.
you can talk about maybe the not so pretty side of dentistry. And, you know, I'm sure, I mean, I'm still a student, but everybody can connect in some way, shape, or form to those failures or downfalls or whatever, and learn from that. Like, there's so much I'm learning, not only from the awesome speakers, but also from talking to everybody that's here in the Podcasters Lounge.
Yeah, I mean, it's rare, you know what
Yeah.
I mean? So I'm not a big person on the word networking, because it seems a little strategic and artificial. Like, I want to be around people who want me to win so I can brag, but not feel like, oh, I'm trying to one-up you, right?
Right.
And so I think it's important to not engineer, but be very intentional about who are you associating with in the profession, who you're not. Because you and I can go on our phones right now, click on some Facebook group, and it's pure toxicity and arguing,
yeah.
mediocre to poor advice. And so you can end up in that spiral and feel like this is a life sentence to a career that I don't enjoy, or I don't look forward to, or I don't feel like I'm thriving in. But then you can get around other people and they're like literally having their best quarter again and again, and they might be harvesting out revenue, they might be harvesting out fulfillment, they might be harvesting out time, it might provide them an incredible life, or all of the above. So it's possible, but you forget the possibility when you're in a situation that all you see is, you know, these prison walls that look like operatories, you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Another thing I wanted to pick your brain about, because I remember your talk vividly. I try to remember it as often as I can, your talk that you gave in Lexington, Kentucky at the Life and Dentistry Conference, and not letting your work get in the way of your life all the time. Obviously, especially dental school, like, it's hard because dental school is your life. And that it takes up a big part of your life, but letting it not consume you.
Right.
Like, you know, it's so hard doing podcasting and being a dental student, you know, and I also have, you know, a serious girlfriend, and hopefully we'll be getting, you know, I'll be proposing this summer and everything, but it's hard to balance all of that. And especially with dentistry, it can be very addictive, especially like for me, it's very addictive sometimes.
100%. It's a big problem.
Yeah.
Because if you look at their career path, I mean, you have people, maybe you're one of them, I don't know. I wasn't somebody that eased through dental school. Like, there were tests that I was afraid of not passing. There were practicals that I was probably the last to finish, right? And so, but to get through, and now it's more competitive than when I applied to dental school, to get through undergrad, DAT, admissions committee, you've already defined yourself as a hyperachiever, and to shut that engine off is almost impossible. And I'm not really encouraging people to do that, but we have to realize what the objective is, right? We have to have clarity. And so, sure, like, if you're in a startup like I was for 3 or 4 years, like, you have to treat that like a newborn child. Like, it needs a lot of intention, a lot of intensity, a lot of, sure, I'll come in at 10:30 to glue your crown back on a Saturday night. And then you do what you have to do until you can do what you want to do. But if you don't know what you want to do, if you don't know what the outcomes are, the narcotic hit in this case for an achiever is more is better and money equals success. And it never works out well, right? Because there are bank accounts in this profession that are swollen, but yet the children don't like you, the father or the mother, or the spouse don't. And so what does success look like is a one-off. Your definition should be completely different than my definition.
Right.
You can gather clues on how do you get there and what should it look like, but if you're trying to be the next me or the next whoever, you've already lost, right? And so the thing that I know about the psychology of money is that people are really looking for an improved lifestyle. And so if you don't take that lifestyle, if you don't take that extra week off after your practice is already thriving, if you don't engineer the memories, if you don't use the money for the right things and you're buying new furniture sets and new cars that's a transient feeling, but the long-term feeling is the memories and the experiences and the connections, because at the end of our day, like, the regrets are all built around the relationships and the times where we should have been courageous and we backed down, and you can't do that. You can't.
You two need each other. That's so
great. Justin Moody, my main man.
Dr. Moody.
You can't hit a target you can't see. And that bit of clarity is, when I talk to mid-career dentists, it's like getting them to answer, what do you want, is an impossible game. Do you know why?
Why?
Because we're golden-hearted servant achievers, and we want to be everything to everyone, and then we become everything to everyone, we're nothing to no one.
Yeah.
And this unexpected consequence by this well-intentioned thing, like, I love dentists because they just want to serve. I mean, we have scoundrels in our profession, but they're few and far between. When I talk to a dentist, typically they're a practice owner, they're married, they have kids. So now they want to be freaking awesome at 4 jobs that are almost, it's an impossible game. And then you put them together and it drives them insane, right?
Yeah.
It's possible, but we don't have the architecture. We don't have the self-care. We don't understand that we have to increase our capacities. But to answer your question, this is long-winded because you hit a passion point for me.
Right, yeah.
If you don't know what you want, you will drive yourself crazy, you'll drive your family crazy, and you'll typically drive your team crazy, because then you end up in this cycle of they don't know what I want, but I'm mad at them because they haven't got it for me. Like, that's an insane organization, right?
Right, yeah.
And what's the ripple effect to their families and patients is the big question. So it's making sure that you're building a practice that serves your life, or a career that serves your life. We all know that going in, and then we end up on this side trail that's like one-upsmanship, or my vacation's longer, my house is bigger, my car is faster, which it's artificial, right? It's short-lasting if there's any substance there at all.
Yeah, I always love talking with you, because so many things that you've talked about I can relate to. You know, I try to please everybody, and sometimes I stretch myself so thin and I commit to something without thinking about, this other person or this other thing, because I want to make them happy, but then I forget about this, and sometimes it's just, my head is spinning sometimes, and it is so hard sometimes to balance all of that. And then
in this world, it's so ripe with overcommitters.
Yeah.
And now I know, like, I'll call you. Like, I don't take it personally, because I know I'm dealing with somebody who would love to do the thing, but there's always other commitments, and sometimes the loudest voice gets heard. It might be your hygienist, might be your spouse, might be your kids. But to not orchestrate that is what leads to a life of disappointment, I think, and not seeing the opportunities that this career can really provide you. Right.
Yeah. And it's always a good reminder to, just to slow down. Like, your life is not consumed by dentistry and dental school. Like, I always love listening to either your podcast or you speak or a lot of other things, because it's just a great reminder that, like, you have all of these other people, your loved ones that you have, and friends that you have to spend time with, and that's sometimes too a trap I fall into. Like, I might, a bunch of friends going out on a Saturday night, and it's like, well, do I study and really try to go for that 100% on that exam, or do I go out, but if I study, I'll be happy that I got that A, but then I'm also going to be upset that I missed out on that night, and like you said, the memories are really what we're going to remember.
Right. I think in a hyper-changing, hyper-intense, hyper-distracted society, we worry about tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
And so how do we get perspective? It's like playing the long game, like earth to death, like the long game.
Yeah.
And understanding, like, in the grand scheme of things, is this going to move the needle? Is it getting me closer to that, what I want as my, legacy sounds like a selfish word, but ultimately we're going to have one by design or by default. And so why not engineer that? And so the micro stuff, the daily, weekly, quarterly things becomes important because they're the building blocks. But if you're off on one, it's, you learn to check it off, because, like, I know the patterns in my career early on, every bad review, every upset patient, every person that I had to fire was like this traumatic experience where I tossed and turned. And then you look at the grand scheme of, like, in 5 years doesn't matter, to my son doesn't matter. Like, try explaining to your son that you got a 1-star review, and they'll be like, like,
who cares? What is that?
Where's the Legos? Yeah. So
Where's
you
the
have
Legos?
to play these kind of psychological games to make sure that you're focusing on what's important and not focusing on what's not. Otherwise, there's plenty of things that are begging for your attention in the now that aren't even relevant a week from now, and then you end up in that reaction spiral, a place of where you're not taking care of yourself, and then you end up being that 45-year-old that his neck hurts, his arm hurts, he wonders, like, you know, why did I get into this profession, period, let alone own my own business that I'm a slave to. Like, there's another path available, but it's not built in the home run. It's built in, like, hitting the single, loading the bases, getting the RBI, and doing it again and again and again. So it's really falling in love with the process that unlocks the lifestyle that I think people are looking for. But if you think it's the next weekend course that's going to spring open the phone calls or the implant cases or whatever, like, there's more to it. And the problem that I have, or I see in dentistry, is that there's a lot of coaches, consultants, even vendors of different types that are showing you their all-star client, and they're giving a testimonial. Typically, that person would have gotten those results with or without them. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, not getting caught in the hype and not feeling insecure because your crown preps don't look like that right now, that your practice isn't doing those revenues right now. Really knowing what's important to you is something, as a gut check, you really need on a daily or weekly basis, or you will get distracted, because I have. My vision has been hijacked so many times in my 10-year practice run, only to find out that my original vision in the very beginning was what it ended up being. I just took all these switchbacks back and forth because I thought I was going to be the implant guy and the apnea guy. Like, I have elements of all those things, but there was never a home run. It was just step by step, rung by rung, day after day, year after year, and really making sure that you're dialed into every patient on that appointment book every day. If you exceed those expectations, you'll build a purpose-driven practice, you'll build an incredible reputation, and then once that hits, like, it's a momentum that you can't slow down that growth. So that's the achiever mindset, understanding, like, if you're going to run a marathon, it's probably going to start with a block, 1 mile, and that's how a prosperous career is built. And I know a lot of people who, like in Titans of Dentistry that we profiled, right? We intentionally ask them from their dark moments because we all have them.
Right.
It's just a decision of whether we fall and just crash or we fall and bounce.
Right. And that's a great book, by the way. I have
you.
it and I've read it, and I love the format of it too. It's really easy to read, and I love that you ask those questions. What's your downfall, or what was your darkest moment in dentistry? Because people reading it, whether it's dentists or dental students, pre-dental students, whoever, like, it's a great learning experience, and it's great to learn from all these great minds in dentistry.
Yeah, that's the struggle, I think, also with the achiever is when bad times hit, usually we own it too much. Thinking it's
hard on yourself.
Character flaw, because that inner critic is built into us, right? You have critics all around you. They're called dental professors. Yeah. They make you better. They want you to understand what great dentistry looks like, what adequate dentistry looks like, and what unacceptable dentistry looks like. I understand it, and I wouldn't take that away, but also understand how that plays out in a business, with a team, and a family. Like, I had a hygienist that I talk about a long time. She's a dear friend of mine to this day. My wife had a stroke in 2013. The team showed up to the hospital bed. We didn't know if she'd make it or not. And I got a card from the team that said, "We're with you every step of the way." And I get emotional, and I think about that.
Yeah.
But I was such a crappy leader. I was a shell of a man. I would just show up and go through the motions. I was probably the worst employee on the team. And about 4 months into that, she said, "You make me feel inadequate." And I knew what it meant, because I was short. I would get questions. I was like, you're asking the wrong guy. Figure it out yourself, right? And 2 months later, maybe, she quit. She went to another dental practice, and I tried to talk her out of it, and there was a bridge that was burnt, and it was remended. But it wasn't that I was being critical to her, Andrea. It's because that's my language to myself. And so life became a mirror. And when I felt like a failure because I wasn't being a good dentist, and I wasn't being a good business owner, I wasn't being a good dad, and I wasn't being a good husband, because I was just, my capacities were, it was like an emotional, financial, every tax, right? And so I didn't have that bandwidth. I was speaking my internal language to her. And so understanding that, you're like, I can be hard on myself because I don't want that to go away, because that's how I built all this, how I built these successes. That's how I became doctor. it's a dangerous game. So you can be dissatisfied, but there also has to be moments of fulfillment and understanding, like, holy cow, like I'm a different person at the end of 2018 than I was at the beginning of 2018, appreciating that between where I am and where I want to go. Yeah, it's important to understand that, but who I am and where I've been is also important to understand, like, holy cow, like I have the ability to take an idea and make it a real thing. I have an idea to transform my academic career, my physical, my relationships, my emotional intelligence, and it's a possibility. That's called growth mindset, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And we have that, but we don't appreciate that, holy cow, like I've climbed 8 stories here, and I'm only trying to figure out how do I get from story 8 to story 20. And that is not a happy place.
Yeah.
So in engineering moments and saying, like, holy cow, like these were magical moments today, or holy cow, like I have a roof over my head.
Yeah, I know.
Holy
yeah.
cow, somebody said, like, we live in America. Like, so in relative terms, what are our biggest problems? Try and explain. Like, I did a medical mission in Angola.
Okay.
And so there are no old people. There are very few people that are my age or older, you know, and so you have an elder who's 50 years old, and then a bunch of orphan kids running around.
Wow.
And there was, in this one village, there was this young boy that kept coming up to me day by day, and I don't know his name, I don't know his situation.
Mm-hmm.
I assume he had no parents because there were all these refugees coming in from Zaire or the Congo, as they call it now. And when I have a bad day, I have to compare it to his bad day, or I have to pretend that I'm explaining my horrible situation to my grandfather who was a medic in World War II.
Yeah,
like,
right.
all of a sudden, this seems ridiculous.
Right.
That I got a 1-star review. Go tell Grandpa that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's all a psychological game, and your internal world will always be reflected in your external world, but nobody really teaches you that game. And if they don't, and you stay in this world of isolation or I got it or this rugged individualism, you start to think you're the only one with these problems. Yeah. And it ain't true. It's normal.
Yeah, it's all about perspective.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was I gonna? Oh, you've mentioned it a couple times, but it's all about really what it comes down to, and what I'm learning is you have to have your why moment. You have to know what you're doing and why you're doing it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And another big part of Titans of Dentistry is so many people I remember have wrote this down, and I forget what section, but they said they write down their why and then reverse engineer it down into those steps that you were talking
Right.
about. So they have a series of steps. It's not just like, I need to float to the top of this mountain right now. It's about the journey of hiking to the top step by step to get there.
Right. So we talked about clarity, right? And so knowing what you want is important, and that has to come without guilt, because you're engineered to want certain things. You might love time. You might be a numbers guy. You might be a money guy. All of that is fine. You can't let your prior conditioning and what your mom said when you're 4 years old dictate your career, right? And so knowing what you want in work and in life and in health and knowing your outcomes is really important. And then that's what influence is that you build a family to support that. You build a team to support that. Not out of selfishness. It's because maybe that's what you were designed to do. So you're digging around in purpose, right?
Yeah.
And so we know what we want, and then what drives that? It's why do we want it? And it might be like, I'm an entrepreneur and I need to see that scoreboard go up and up and up. That's okay.
Yeah.
Right? But the thing where dentists always go sideways is immediately they have this compelling what and this compelling why, and they're all fired up, and then where do they go to? They go to the how. Because all of our training is how.
Yeah.
You have a surgical technique. You use this elevator, the crier, this, whatever. And when this happens, then you do this, right? And so there's a recipe to almost everything we do, not to mention it's a highly controlled environment. Life and business does not work that way because it's based on other people. And so a tooth, a molar, a number 14 does not behave like your hygienist who might be an A player for 3 years, and then she has some sort of crisis, a sick kid, a problem at home, a financial problem, a marriage problem, and all of a sudden she becomes a C player. You want a recipe for that? Like, no, it doesn't work that way. And so when trying to control and trying to do this how thing, we get sidetracked. If our what is powerful, if our why is powerful, the how is kind of like whatever the hell it takes.
Yeah.
And then the magic thing that I learned through coaching and understanding human behavior and how you create behavior change goes what, why, who. Who do I have to become? Because a limit of any organization will be the leader, and the limit of any leader will be their identity. And so if they don't level up their identity through understanding their beliefs, stories, habits, and interchanging them like a bad virus or a software program, you will stay stuck. So you have these dentists who are doing more and more and more stuck in the how, but they don't ever level up who they are. They look in the mirror and hate who they are, which goes back to a previous discussion we just had, is this inner critic. If we don't size the inner critic, you start to think you're not worth it, or you start to change things for the wrong why. And then all of a sudden it's a bottle of bourbon a night, or Vicodin, or all these sorts of things. So it's something I'm really concerned with in our profession, is because this isn't a conversation that people are willing to have because they're proud. They're doctors. They're really busy proving that they're enough to the world. And so it's hard to say, like, I had a really tough quarter. Like, I don't know how I'm going to make payroll. I don't know how I'm going to make this patient happy because I thought this all-in-4 was going to hold up, and it's not. It's a really difficult conversation, but staying trapped in that spiral is a prison that you can't get out of unless you go into that formula. And now that I understand behavioral change, I understand why dentists get stuck for so long, is because they're stuck in the how. You might double your workload and still have the same profits. That's why. It might be a story that your dad told you when you were sitting at the table, that doctors don't earn what they're getting paid, or they're overpaid, or there might be these little viruses in your head that limit you, who you are and what you think you're worth. And if you don't investigate that and stick with the how, you'll either get sidelined or stuck, or you'll start chasing what we talked about before, is more is better, money equals success, which, fine, you might have more stuff, but how deep are your relationships? How good is your health?
Yes.
Are you out of the practice for 3 months because you're in the hospital bed and in a desperate situation? So I can see the patterns of why dentists run into these brick walls all the time, and certainly I have. I'm placing no judgment. But there's a pattern of behavior I see here, and there's also a pattern interrupt that's really important that I think you just touched on, and that says that we get stuck in the how, and you can't treat training your team like how you do a molar endo. It's a process, certainly, but you have to be able to riff, because what they say may not be what you think they say. And so the question I often get is like, well, how do I handle a situation? Well, they want 3 magic words that they're going to say, and like, yeah, you don't know. You know what I mean? Like, you're in a boxing match here, and so like, to assume that you know the other person's next moves, and I don't mean that has to be that confrontational, but you get the idea. Like, there needs to be some resourcefulness and versatility mentally, or you lose.
Yeah.
Or you get disappointed because your outcomes are mediocre, that sort of thing. So I think that gets more and more important as we go on here, because now in an innovation age, change is accelerating. So somebody like you're going to graduate with a certain skill set, and you might need a completely different skill set in a decade. So being able to shut down previous beliefs and introduce new ones is going to be, that adaptability is going to be something that keeps you ahead of the game the whole time. Whereas somebody who's like, I just want to be a dentist and drill holes in teeth and fill them, like, okay, tough road. Like, you signed up for the wrong profession if you're not willing to reinvent yourself and your practice. And I'm not just talking about from ownership, but as an entrepreneur, like, you're going to get paid on the revenues or commission of some sort if you can't communicate to a patient differently and engineer differently than a closed off somebody who's worried about money. If you can't be adaptable throughout the day, it's a long road.
Yeah,
it's a long road.
Mindset is everything. That's what I'm learning right now. Is that whether you're stuck in the how, or you're focused on one specific procedure or one specific hygienist, or trying to explain one set of instructions. It's all about perspective and realizing that there's so much more than just that thing. I mean, I always talk about whenever we're prepping something in our sim clinic or something, it's like we have our loops on, we're focused on that one tooth the entire time, and then you take your loops off, and then you get this, you're like, oh, I didn't even realize occlusion or how this looks or anything, because you were never zoomed out on the entire picture. And if you don't have that growth mindset and that closed off, or if you have that closed off mindset, like, you lose. You got to stay open-minded and keep the big picture in mind, and I think that's where that growth really stems from.
Man, you hit on an important metaphor that I hadn't really thought about, but that clinical thing about how we do that, and you might be prepping that tooth, and there might be you didn't probe it, and there might be a fractured root that you don't know about, right?
Sure.
And so we do all that. We do that stuff all the time in our life and our business. It might show up as parenting. It might show up as our marriage relationship, a romantic relationship, but it typically shows up in team where you're fighting battles that you might win the battle, but you're going to lose the war, right? So you're making the unimportant important, and you're making the important unimportant sometimes. And so taking that, Gary Vaynerchuk calls it clouds and dirt. Like, you need the micro perspective, certainly clinical, certainly the elements of sterilization, the process that a new patient comes on board. Those things should be micromanaged. And there's other things, it's like, hey, it's more of a dance. Like, you got to get out of that clinical hat and put it down and realize, like, you just got to shut up and listen now for 20 minutes and seek to understand the patient, the team member. And that's the emotional equity that we're sometimes not good at, because we want results now. We see a problem, we like to fix it. A crack gets a crown, a pocket gets scaling replanning, whatever it is. Like, this is not a prescription game outside of the clinical. And so it's hard.
Yeah.
Because we have to understand that what serves me here, what makes me really good here, might be destroying me here. So I'm literally shutting down this role of clinician and now being dad. I'm shutting down this role as endodontist, and now I'm being a great leader. Or I'm building other leaders. That's a completely different skill set. And if you treat it like the same and you're trying to isolate it like saliva and tongue and control it to that game, like control everything, you control nothing. So I love that metaphor, because it's what we do and what we see every day, but it has impact on so many other things that really are the game changers. I was joking before, like, everyone here is looking, not everyone here, but in our profession, everyone's looking for a better burr. But what burr ever set the practice free, right? That's the game, is understanding when we need to be a technician and when we need to be an alchemist or an innovator or a really savvy leader.
Yeah. Dentistry's complex.
It is.
We got to wear so many different hats, and there's so many different roles we need to take on in a day. And I feel like sometimes it's hard to switch quickly from one to the other. And
it's really hard.
Yeah.
The one thing, as you build out your career and younger listeners, the one thing, it's hard to compartmentalize, but the sure way to drive yourself crazy is to try and do all of those things at the same time. And so the one thing I would say, and you can't, I don't want to give the wrong impression, but when I went from 4 days to 3 days in my dental practice, it grew by 15%. How is that possible? Because I used part of that fourth day to be very strategic, and I bundled those 3 days. I tried to be as hardcore of a dentist as I could. Leadership stuff, strategy, business strategy, marketing stuff, all got tabled into that. It was half a day is what I started with. And it was so effective to say, like, I'm not worrying about dentistry today. I am the CEO today. Imagine just your favorite actor, right? Like, you've seen him or her in lots of different movies. He has different roles. It's called the alter ego effect. There's an incredible book that just came out about it. It's something that I've been using for a long time, of understanding, like, when I get on stage, I have to be a different animal when I'm presenting than when I'm not presenting. Shy, introverted, somebody trying to figure out how to get the last millimeter on a root canal is a different person, right? And we think of identity as one thing, but the research shows, this is a Todd Herman book that I'm referring to, shows that we have multiple roles. So maybe you're Fred Rogers when you're trying to be a parent, but you're Genghis Khan when you get on stage or whatever, you know what I mean?
Right.
And that's okay. That's not pathology. That's called normal. You're just leveraging natural tendencies. So understanding that today I'm a dentist, Monday I'm a dentist, Tuesday I'm a dentist, Wednesday I'm a dentist, Thursday morning I'm a CEO, and I call the shots then, it makes it a lot easier, because you start going in circles, and you're the customer service agent, and you're the sales rep, and you're the clinician, and you're the CEO, and oh wait, so-and-so didn't come back from lunch. Like, that will drive you crazy. As I explain, it's easy to see what drives you crazy, but we engage in that without knowing, like, there's I'm spinning all these plates when maybe I should segment and compartmentalize a little bit, just to be hyper effective, hyper focused, and understand my roles and goals. And I had to do that same thing at home. I had a moment, not proud of, but I'll share it with you. I was listening to a podcast. The podcast was so important, I don't even remember what podcast it was.
Okay.
But I was in the last 5 or 7 minutes, and I threw in my earbuds, and I got in the garage, and I shut off my Jeep, And I walked in, and my son came running up to me like he hadn't seen me in years. It's what little boys do when they see their dad, or little girls. That's what you want. It's why you build this whole thing typically,
That's
right? And I brushed him off. And I said, not now, Bennett, I need to finish this podcast. And I walked into the other room, and the shame hit me to such a degree that I realized that I had to do that on the way home. Then what I started doing is, it's called a trigger. It's when you build a habit, you always have a trigger. Pulling in and shutting the garage door meant I was done with dental office. Right. That thing is a distant memory to me. That thing is built to serve my family. Took a deep breath, and I moved into husband and father, because it's so, I mean, we talk about work-life balance.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really believe in it. It's all life.
Yeah, it
because if I have a sick kid at home, I can't not take that to the morning huddle. If I have a rift with my favorite hygienist, I can't not take that home. But figuring out boundaries of, like, I can bring it home 10% and not let it ruin my sleep or my dinner and all that sort of stuff. Being able to segment to that degree is realistic. So it's all life, but understanding roles and goals in the moment and the intention. Like, when we sat down, I just had the intention to serve. I don't know what you're going to ask me, but that frees me up to I'm not pitching anything. I'm not trying to convince anyone of anything, but whatever you're asking me or whatever we're dialoguing about, I want to bring all of myself to that. If I'm worried about I'm the guy at lunch, or I'm the guy who has to speak, or I'm the guy who has to go shake hands with all these people, we lose the magic of the moment. And that's a micro thing, but that is very indicative of how our life stacks up as a life of regret or a life of, like, holy cow, what a ride, right?
Right. Yeah. And you just hit on something too that I've been working on is what you're hitting at is being present.
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes it's very difficult to do, especially, you know, if you got people on Instagram commenting on your podcast or, you know, X, Y, and Z, and you're in the middle of dinner with your family or girlfriend or whatever. And I mean, sometimes it's so difficult to stay present, but I love the idea of a trigger. Like, you know, you walk through the door and now you're done with that part of your day, and it's time to be present with family and loved ones and stuff like that, because when you come home, like, that's what's important. And like you said, the family and friends and significant others, that's what's going to be important 6 weeks from now. Yeah. You know what I mean? So a lot of what you're saying makes total sense, and I can totally relate to that.
Let me give you one other super powerful example. If I didn't live it, I wouldn't believe it.
Okay.
I started really understanding the art of coaching 2.5 years ago, and I started doing training, and I started understanding behavior change and habits and triggers and all this sort of stuff. And I learned a strategy called doorway trigger, which is essentially what I told you that I had going home. I would call it garage door trigger.
Okay.
But the thing that happened that year is that was the year that I went from 4 to 3 days. And so to pack 15% more in an already practice that was filled to capacity, already had more demand than we could support, and get that done in 3 days is a hard game. We had to plug a lot of holes in the bucket. We had to make sure that there was no open chair time. But in the busyness of that, I was feeling like we weren't who we said we were. We weren't giving our presence to the patients, and I wasn't, because sometimes I was working out of one op and I'd have 3 hygiene checks. And some people are really good at that game. I'm okay, efficient speed-wise, but no one's going to say, oh my gosh, I can't believe you finished that crown prep so fast. And so I'd have 2 hygienists waiting outside my door, and then what happens is you're never where you are, right? So I'm trying to finish the crown prep, but I'm really doing the exam in op 2. And when I'm doing the exam in op 2, I'm really already on my way to op 1. And so I use this doorway trigger to create an unbelievably powerful moment. So I learned the strategy in September. I started doing it in September. October in Vail, Colorado is like a ghost town. Restaurants shut down. People go back home. People take their month-long trip to Austria, whatever, right? And so I was used to that being a really tricky financial month. And I kind of got sick of it. But I couldn't market because I had no capacity for new patients. So what are we going to do? I don't know. I really don't know. And so sometimes I could market over it, but I wasn't in a position to do that. So I started using this doorway trigger. And I asked myself, these patients who are seeing me, what do they want? My answer was, they want a happy man that's ready to serve. Sometimes I wasn't happy, and sometimes I wasn't ready to serve, to be really honest, particularly longer in the day where you get decision fatigue longer in the week. And so I started leaving what my primary production op 4, and resetting, taking a deep breath or 2 or 3, depending on the intensity of the situation. And I would walk through the door, and my inner dialogue was, in this door is a happy man who is ready to serve. October, always worst month. That October 2017, I think it was, best month ever. And the only thing that changed, there was no procedure mix added, no additional days. We were down to 11 or 12 days. The only thing that changed was the leader. And it just meant a little bit more eye contact, a little bit more small talk, a little bit more discussion. I mean, not even significant. If you were to notice, oh, he's so different in June as he was in October, no one would even pick up on it. But that intention and that intensity changed everything, and it never slowed down. But that's what patients want, right? And we get lost in the numbers, or I got to find one more crown today because we're scheduled to go or we're not scheduled to go. It's kind of, I get a little uptight about some of the management advice, not understanding that if the leader doesn't rise, the kingdom dies to some degree, and taking that level of accountability and realize that it's those little mind shifts that they say in marketing, little hinges swing big doors. It sounds, as you're listening to me, so trivial. You're like, why would I even do that, right? But you stack that up, 30 patients a day over the course of a career, it changed the trajectory of everything, just that one thing, right? But we miss that stuff, right? Because we're chasing something sexy, or we're new technology, or a new bell and whistle, the home run. That's the single that loads the bases, that is brick by brick, builds a incredible structure. And so that's the level of accountability that really, we were growing just fine. But once I realized that organizations are limited by the leader and I'm limiting myself, I had to get to that granular level to figure out, like, hey, what's the next level? And once I did, look out. So that's the missing piece that I see in a lot of the dialogue in business management, practice management, is how do we really become true leaders, where we're not trying to create followers, we're trying to create fellow leaders. That's the game, right? And as you already said it all starts with our own internal dialogue, our own psychology, and understanding that some of the things that are holding us back aren't obvious. So we have to go into the dark places and figure out what it really is, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Somebody said today, like, little did I know that I was becoming a dentist just to make my proud father, my dead father proud.
Mm-hmm.
So he was admitting that he was chasing a goat. That's a powerful thing.
It is.
He may never stop, but the understanding of that may also allow him more control of the fulfillment and the progress of his career, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I mean, this
It's an honor,
conversation has been absolutely amazing, and I really appreciate all of your insight, especially like as a dental student. Like, I think dental students, it's so important for us to be hearing this now, so we are prepared and kind of armed with some of those tools you were talking about, like the doorway trigger. That's going to be so helpful for us down the road, and we can apply that right when we
immediately,
start.
right?
Immediately, yeah,
There's
exactly.
so many circumstances where you're not showing up the way you want.
Right.
That's how you do it.
Yeah.
You engineer the outcome before you show up, and then you have, like, some people, they have dinner, they need to go smoke. Dinner is the trigger for smoking. You can engineer triggers to create behaviors, and then it always helps to have a reward at the end of saying, like, holy cow, like, I showed up in a different way for this conversation. I might have been defensive yesterday, but today I showed up to understand, and it changed the outcome completely, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks again, everybody who is listening. Make sure you go check out the book Titans of Dentistry, as well as the Relentless Dentist podcast that Dr. Maloley is on. So please check that out. And thanks again so much.
Hey, man,
it's
it's an
awesome.
honor.
It's always
Yeah,
an
great to
honor.
see you again.
Absolutely. Take care. Thank you so
Appreciate
much.
you.